I never thought I'd see the day when my own home would stop feeling like mine. For over 40 years, the walls of this house have held every joy, every sorrow, every little piece of my family's life. I built it with my husband when we were young, when we had nothing but love and a few savings. Brick by brick, nail by nail, we created something that wasn't just wood and stone. It was a promise that no matter how life treated us, we would always have a place to come back to. My name is Agnes Whitford. I'm 74 years old, and this is my story. But before I begin, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? I've always found comfort in knowing people across states, across oceans, sometimes even across generations, share their own stories with me. So let me know, and maybe as you listen, you'll see a bit of your own life in mine. Now let me take you back to where it all started, not with betrayal, but with love. My husband, Robert, was the kind of man who worked hard and spoke softly. He used to say, "A house is just a shell until you fill it with memories." And oh, how we filled this one. The kitchen was where he'd sneak in late-night sandwiches after a long shift. The living room, where we watched our boy, Daniel, take his first steps. The dining room table, solid oak, heavy enough to outlast time itself. That table was where we celebrated birthdays, graduations, even quiet Sunday dinners where nothing happened, except the beauty of being together. After Robert passed 10 years ago, the house became my anchor. Every corner whispered his name. His jacket still hangs in the hallway closet, untouched. Some might call it stubborn, but for me, it's a reminder that he was real, that he loved me, and that love doesn't just vanish with time. When Daniel married Rebecca, I thought maybe this house would once again ring with laughter, with footsteps running up and down the hall. I opened my doors without hesitation. After all, Daniel was my only child. He deserved happiness, and if letting them live with me while they got on their feet would help, then why not? That's what family is for. At first, Rebecca was sweet, too sweet maybe. She'd compliment my cooking, bring me little gifts, smile as though I were her own mother. But I've lived long enough to know that some smiles hide sharp edges. Slowly, her words turned from compliments to suggestions, and then to criticisms. "Maybe we should repaint this room," she'd say, looking at my wallpaper with wrinkled brows. "The kitchen could use new cabinets, don't you think?" I brushed it off. Young people want things modern, sleek, different. It didn't bother me too much, not at first. I told myself, "Agnes, don't take it personally. They're just adjusting." But deep down, I noticed something. Rebecca wasn't just making suggestions. She was testing boundaries. Daniel, my son, he wasn't much help. He'd sit quietly, nodding along, not defending me, not contradicting her. Sometimes I wondered if he even noticed the shift, or if he chose not to see it. That was Daniel all over, peaceful to a fault, the kind of man who would rather swallow his own tongue than start a fight. As months passed, I started to feel a strange heaviness. My home was the same walls, the same furniture, the same memories. But the air felt different, thicker, like I was slowly being pushed to the edges of my own life. I would walk into the living room and find Rebecca sprawled on the couch, feet on the coffee table, watching television like it was hers. I'd say, "Could you not put your shoes up there, dear?" "That table's been here longer than you've been alive." She'd give me that smile, the one that didn't reach her eyes, and say, "Of course, Agnes." But the next day the shoes would be back. It was little things, always little things, and little by little they add up. They chip away at your peace, until one day you wake up and realize you're not sleeping in your own home. You're sleeping in a place where you're tolerated, not respected. still, I held on. I told myself it was worth it to keep the family together, to be close to my son, to maybe even hear the sound of grandchildren's laughter filling these rooms one day. I convinced myself that patience was the wiser choice, but I had no idea what was coming, no idea how close I was to losing the very dignity that kept me upright after Robert's death. And it all started, as most family wars do, not with shouting, but with a simple dinner, a table, and one push that would change everything. If you asked me today when things truly began to sour between Rebecca and me, I couldn't point to one single moment. It was more like a series of small cracks forming in a wall, tiny at first, but with each passing day they spread wider until the whole structure felt like it might collapse. The first real crack came one afternoon when I was making stew, the same recipe Robert used to love. The smell of onions and garlic filled the air, and for a moment it felt like home again. Rebecca walked into the kitchen, wrinkled her nose, and said, "Don't you think it's time we moved on from these old-fashioned meals? Daniel likes lighter, fresher food. Maybe you should let me handle the cooking." I stood there, wooden spoon in hand, staring at her. That stew had been the heart of our family dinners for decades. It wasn't just food. It was memory, tradition, comfort. But I swallowed my pride and smiled, saying, "Well, I suppose there's room for everyone's taste." She took that as an invitation, and soon I was pushed to the sidelines of my own kitchen. The kitchen, that sacred space where I once danced barefoot with Robert while he teased me about putting too much salt in the soup, became Rebecca's stage. She rearranged the cabinets without asking. Suddenly, the sugar was where the flour had been for 30 years. I'd reach for a pan and find an empty space because she had decided to store them more efficiently elsewhere. At first I tried to adapt. I told myself, "Agnes, you're just being stubborn. Maybe this change is good." But deep down, each shift felt like a theft. She wasn't just moving things, she was moving me out, piece by piece. And Daniel? He noticed. Of course, he did. But whenever I'd give him a look across the table, my eyebrows raised in that silent plea for support, he'd clear his throat, glance at Rebecca, and stay quiet. It was as though he had handed her the keys to not just his life, but mine too. One evening I decided to test him. After Rebecca left the room, I said softly, "Daniel, do you really not mind her changing everything in the house?" He shifted uncomfortably in his chair and muttered, "Mom, she just wants to feel like this is her home too. Can you try to give her that?" That cut deeper than I expected. Her home? This house, with Robert's sweat in the beams and my years of care in every polished corner, was suddenly not mine alone? I forced a smile, but inside something twisted. Still, I tried to make peace. I let her cook, let her rearrange, even agreed when she suggested replacing my old lace curtains with plain modern blinds. "It's just curtain," I told myself. But when I saw those blinds hanging there, erasing the soft glow that Robert had loved, I felt like another piece of him was being scrubbed out. The tension grew louder during dinners. Rebecca had a way of speaking over me, as if my words were just background noise. I'd be telling a story about Robert, something sweet, something that made Daniel smile, and she'd cut in with, "Oh, Daniel, remember when we went to the lake that summer?" He'd turn to her, laugh, and the moment would slip through my fingers like sand. I noticed her testing me in other ways, too. She began inviting her friends over without asking me. Young women in sharp clothes laughing loudly in my living room, sipping wine on the very couch Robert and I had saved 3 years to buy. They'd smile politely at me, but I could feel it. the way they looked around like this place was just waiting to be remodeled into something Instagram-worthy. One of them even whispered, thinking I couldn't hear, "It's such a shame this place still feels old." I pretended not to catch it, but inside I burned. And then there were the subtle exclusions. When they watched movies, they didn't ask me to join. When they planned little weekend outings, they left quietly, as though I were an inconvenience. I'd sit by the window, knitting, watching the taillights disappear down the street, telling myself I didn't mind. But oh, I did. I began to notice how Rebecca spoke about the future. "When we repaint this room," she'd say, "when we update the garden." Not if, not maybe, always when, as if decisions were already hers to make. It was, becoming clearer every day. Rebecca didn't see me as part of this house. She saw me as a guest, maybe even an obstacle, standing in the way of her vision. But I told myself patience was the answer. Daniel was my boy. Surely he'd never let things go too far. Surely he'd remember whose roof sheltered him when life was uncertain. I had no idea how wrong I was, because soon Rebecca wouldn't just hint or whisper or scheme behind polite smiles. She would take it a step further, right in front of Daniel, right in front of me, and with one push, she'd cross a line that could never be uncrossed. It was a Sunday evening, one of those nights I always cherished. Sundays were sacred in our family. Robert and I used to call them reset dinners. No matter what had happened in the week, no matter how tired or busy, Sunday meant gathering around the oak table, sharing a meal, and reminding ourselves that family was where everything began and ended. Even after Robert passed, I held on to that ritual. It wasn't just a habit. It was my way of keeping him alive. I'd polish the silverware, lay out the tablecloth we bought on our 25th anniversary, and light a single candle in the center. Robert used to say the candlelight made even soup taste like a feast. That evening I had cooked pot roast, slow and tender the way Robert loved it. The house smelled warm and rich, and for a moment it almost felt like the old days. I set the plates, folded the napkins just right, and placed the heavy serving dish in the middle of the table. Daniel came down first, sitting quietly, scrolling through his phone. Rebecca followed, her heels clicking across the floor like she owned the place. She glanced at the table, then at me, and smirked. "Agnes," she said, her voice sickly sweet, "why don't you let me handle dinners from now on? You've done enough. I think it's time I take over." I looked up from the table, holding the gravy ladle in my hand. "This is our family tradition, Rebecca," I said gently. "I've always cooked Sunday dinner. It's something your father-in-law cherished." Her smile tightened. "Yes, but things are different now. Daniel and I need to start our own traditions. Don't you think it's time you stepped back a little?" Her words stung, but I forced myself to keep calm. "I don't mind you starting your own traditions," I said softly, "but this table, this meal, has always belonged to the family." I moved to sit down at my usual seat, the one I had occupied for 40 years, the chair that still bore the faint scratch, where Robert once dragged it across the floor too hard. But before I could pull it fully out, Rebecca's hand shot out. She pressed against my shoulder, firm, unyielding, and pushed me back. The room froze. "This isn't your table anymore," she said flatly, her smile gone. "This house is ours now. You're lucky we even let you sit here." Her words sliced through me, sharper than any knife could. I stumbled back a step, clutching the edge of the chair, my knees trembling. Daniel's fork clinked against his plate as he set it down. But he didn't speak. His eyes darted between us, but his mouth stayed shut. I searched his face for something, anger, defense, loyalty, but found only cowardice. He looked away, like a boy too afraid to stand up to the schoolyard bully. Except this wasn't a playground. This was my home. My heart pounded in my chest. The humiliation, the disrespect, the sheer audacity of her words, it all came crashing down at once. I could feel Robert's memory hanging heavy in the air, as if he were watching, as if he were asking me, "Agnes, are you really going to let her erase everything we built?" But I didn't fight back. Not yet. My hands trembled too much. My throat was too tight. I pulled my chair out again, sat down quietly, and ate in silence. I don't remember the taste of the food. I don't remember if Daniel or Rebecca said another word. All I remember is the cold weight in my chest, the hollow echo of her voice repeating, "This house is ours now." I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Robert's old jacket hanging in the closet just visible in the dim light. My mind replayed the moment again and again, her hand on my shoulder, the push, the smug look on her face. That was the moment something inside me shifted. For years I had been patient. I had told myself to be gentle, to compromise, to avoid conflict for Daniel's sake. But patience had only taught Rebecca that I was weak, that I could be pushed aside, literally and figuratively. No more. That night, in the quiet of my bedroom, I whispered to Robert's memory, "I won't let her take this house from us. I won't let her take me from it." And when morning came, I knew exactly what I had to do. That night, the house felt different. The walls that had once wrapped around me like a blanket of safety suddenly seemed cold, almost mocking. I walked down the hallway after dinner, each creak of the floorboard sounding louder than usual, as if the house itself was reminding me, "You are being pushed out of your own space." I shut the door to my bedroom quietly, though no one cared enough to notice. My hands trembled as I slid the lock into place. I had never locked my bedroom door before, not once in 40 years of living there. Robert and I always believed in openness, but now I needed a barrier, even if it was just wood and a simple lock, to protect what little dignity I had left. I sat on the edge of my bed, my chest still heavy from the humiliation. Rebecca's words replayed in my head. "This house is ours now." That smug tone, the push of her hand, the silence of my son. Those moments carved themselves into me like scars. I tried to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. It wasn't sadness. It was something sharper, deeper, anger, betrayal. A fire I hadn't felt in years. Glanced across the room to the closet. Hanging on the inside of the door was Robert's old brown jacket. It had been there since the day he died, untouched but never forgotten. I rose slowly, walked over and ran my hand across the worn fabric. The scent of him was long gone, but the weight of his presence lingered. I heard his voice in my memory, deep and steady. "Never let anyone take what's rightfully yours, Agnes. Not a thing. Not ever." He used to say that when neighbors tried to take advantage of his kindness, when co-workers walked over him at the factory, he believed respect wasn't just something given. It was something you demanded when necessary. And here I was, standing in the home he and I built, being told I was a guest. The thought made my chest tighten, but it also brought a strange sense of clarity. I sat down at my little writing desk, pulled out an old notebook, and began writing. Not a letter, not a diary entry, just thoughts, raw and unfiltered. They think I am weak. They think I will accept being pushed aside. They forget whose name is written on the papers. They forget whose blood, sweat, and tears built this place. If Robert were alive, he would never allow this. And if I am his wife, I will not allow it either. The more I wrote, the steadier my hand became. The heaviness in my chest began to shift. It wasn't gone, but it was transforming into something sharper. Resolve. Still, when I put down the pen, the silence of the night pressed against me. I could hear laughter faintly down the hall, Rebecca's laugh. She wasn't affected at all. To her it was done. She had declared victory. And Daniel, oh my son, he was quiet, always quiet, too afraid to stand for me, too blind to see what his silence cost me. I lay down eventually, staring at the ceiling. I counted the cracks in the paint, traced the familiar shadows cast by the streetlight outside, but sleep refused to come. My body was tired, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. Around midnight, I whispered aloud, as though Robert were lying beside me, "Don't worry, love. I won't let her win. This house, it's still ours." For the first time in months, I felt a strange calm wash over me. Yes, Rebecca had pushed me. Yes, Daniel had betrayed me with his silence. But tomorrow, the tables would turn. Tomorrow I would remind them whose name was etched into the deed, whose life was carved into every corner of this house. By the time the first light of dawn crept into my room, I had made my decision. I rose, showered, and dressed in my best navy blue cardigan, the one Robert always said made me look official. I sat at the kitchen table, my table, and sipped my tea slowly, waiting for the hour to be decent enough to call my lawyer. Rebecca might have thought she had pushed me out, but she had no idea what was coming. Morning sunlight streamed weakly through the blinds as I sat at the kitchen table, my tea cooling beside me. The Stewa house was quiet. Rebecca was still in bed, and Daniel had already left for work. For the first time in a long while, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like opportunity. I reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out a faded leather folder. The edges were frayed, the brass clip slightly tarnished, but inside it was something priceless. Proof. Proof of who this house belonged to. Years ago, after Robert and I finally paid off the last cent of our mortgage, we had gone down to the county clerk's office together. I remember how proud he looked, his chest puffed out like a boy who had just won his first medal. "It's in your name too, Agnes," he had said with a grin. "That way, if anything ever happens, no one can take it away from you." Back then, I didn't think much of it. I trusted Daniel, and I never imagined a day would come when my own child, or his wife, would treat me like an outsider. But Robert, he had always been practical, always seen a step ahead. He made sure the deed was ironclad, signed, sealed, and tucked away safely. And so it had sat, all these years, in this very folder, untouched, waiting. I spread the papers out carefully on the table, running my fingers over the embossed seal. My name, clear as day. Agnes Whitford, owner, sole and undisputed. Rebecca and Daniel had never asked. They assumed in their arrogance that because they lived here, because Daniel was my son, the house would somehow default to them. They never once thought to question whose name was written, where it mattered most. I couldn't help but smile. Bitter, yes, but also relieved. They could rearrange my kitchen, replace my curtains, even push me from my chair, but they could not erase ink. They could not erase law. I reached for the phone and dialed the number of Mr. Harlan, the lawyer Robert and I had used for years. He was old now, older than me even, but sharp as ever. His secretary answered, and within minutes I heard his familiar gravelly voice. "Agnes, it's been a while. How are you holding up?" I hesitated, swallowing down the lump in my throat. "I've been better, Harlan, but I need your help." He listened quietly as I explained what had happened. The push at the table, Rebecca's words, Daniel's silence. My voice cracked once, but I forced myself to keep steady. When I was done, there was a pause. "Agnes," he finally said, his tone firm, "you don't have to live like that. That's your house. You have every right to demand respect, or demand they leave. We can prepare an eviction notice today." The words hit me like a breath of fresh air. Eviction. Such a simple word, but heavy with meaning. It was justice. It was Robert's promise, finally realized. Would it be cruel? I asked softly. The thought of sending my son and his wife away felt like cutting off a limb. Harlan sighed. "Sometimes, Agnes, the kindest thing you can do, for yourself and for them, is to set boundaries they can't ignore. Respect is not optional, not even from family." He was right. Deep down, I had known it since that push. We set an appointment for the afternoon. I hung up the phone and sat there for a moment, staring at the papers. My hands no longer trembled. They felt steady, certain. I thought back to all the times Rebecca had mocked my traditions, sneered at my belongings, claimed my spaces as her own, and Daniel, my son, who let her do it, who sat silently while his wife pushed his mother aside. No, this wasn't just about the house anymore. This was about dignity. Mine, Robert's. Every sacrifice we had made to create a safe home. I gathered the deed, tucked it neatly back into the folder, and placed it in my handbag. For years I had hidden those papers like some dusty relic of the past. But now, they were my shield, my weapon, my answer. Later that day, I walked into Mr. Harlan's office, the familiar creak of the leather chair greeting me as I sat down. He drafted the notice quickly, sliding the papers across the desk. "There," he said, tapping the signature line. "Once you sign, it's official. They'll have 30 days to vacate unless you give them less. You decide." I held the pen in my hand, staring at the line. For a moment, my heart wavered. Could I really do this? Could I really turn my own son out? But then I remembered Rebecca's hand on my shoulder, the sneer in her voice. This house is ours now. And Daniel, my Daniel, silent. My hand didn't tremble as I signed. When I left the office, the eviction notice tucked safely in my purse. The air outside felt different, lighter, stronger. Rebecca thought she had pushed me down, but what she didn't know was that I was about to push back, with the full weight of law, memory, and justice on my side. I walked home from Mr. Harlan's office with the notice tucked carefully in my purse, the way one might carry something fragile and dangerous all at once. Every step I took seemed heavier, but steadier. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a guest in my own life. I felt like the woman Robert had always believed me to be, strong, capable, unwilling to bow when respect was denied. When I got back, the house was empty. Rebecca had left a half-drunk cup of coffee on the counter, lipstick staining the rim, as though she owned even the mugs I had collected over decades. I stared at it for a moment, then quietly poured it down the sink. I sat at the oak table, the very table where she had pushed me aside, and laid out the notice. The black ink seemed to glow against the white page. Simple words, yet so final. This notice serves to inform you that you are required to vacate the premises within 30 days. 30 days. I could have chosen less. Harlan had told me the law was on my side, but I wasn't heartless. Despite everything, this was still my son. 30 days would be enough for them to find somewhere else, to realize I wasn't bluffing, and maybe, just maybe, to reflect on what they had done. But I wasn't naive. I knew Rebecca wouldn't take this quietly. That evening, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the window, staring out into the garden Robert and I had once tended together. I thought about what was coming, the confrontation, the shouting, the tears. I thought about Daniel's face, how lost he looked when caught between loyalty to me and loyalty to her. And I felt my heart ache for him. "Why did you let it get this far, Daniel?" I whispered to the darkening sky. "Why did you let her think she could erase me?" I slept little that night, but when I woke the next morning, my resolve hadn't wavered. I dressed carefully, choosing my navy cardigan again, the one Robert used to say made me look like I could walk into any office and be taken seriously. I pinned my small pearl brooch to the collar, not for vanity, but for armor. When Rebecca came into the kitchen that morning, she found me sitting at the table with the notice folded neatly in front of me. She was in her robe, yawning, her hair messy from sleep. She barely acknowledged me as she poured herself coffee, humming lightly as though nothing in the world could disturb her reign. I studied her quietly, wondering if she had any idea what was coming. Probably not. Arrogance makes people blind. The paper in front of me felt heavier than stone. My hands rested calmly on the table, but my heart beat hard beneath my ribs. I rehearsed the words in my mind. Calm, steady, factual. No anger, no shouting, just truth. Rebecca turned, mug in hand, and raised an eyebrow at me. "You're up early, Agnes. Couldn't sleep?" Her tone was light, mocking, as though she still believed I was the weaker one. I smiled, not with warmth, but with something firmer. "I slept just fine," I replied, "but I thought it was time we cleared something up." Her brows furrowed slightly, and she leaned against the counter. "Cleared something up? About what?" I didn't answer. Not yet. I simply slid the folded notice toward me, ready for the moment. I knew Daniel would be home by evening, and I knew this conversation wasn't just with her. It was with him, too. He needed to hear it, needed to see me stand my ground. For too long he had hidden behind silence. That luxury was about to end. That day I moved about the house quietly, almost ceremonially. I dusted Robert's framed photograph on the mantel, polished the silverware, and even set fresh flowers in the dining room. It was my way of reclaiming the space before the battle began. Every glance at the eviction notice reminded me, this wasn't just about property. It was about dignity, about boundaries, about respect that had been eroded one insult, one sneer, one push at a time. By evening, the stage was set. The notice waited in its envelope, crisp and undeniable. I had placed it carefully in the middle of the oak table. Rebecca's smirk would fade soon enough, and Daniel, my son, would be forced to choose. The house felt heavy that evening, like a storm was gathering in the walls. I had set the eviction notice in its envelope right at the center of the oak table, the same table Rebecca once pushed me from. It almost glowed under the soft lamplight, daring me to put an end to the charade. Daniel came home first, weary from work, his tie loosened, his eyes fixed on the floor. He barely glanced at me as he trudged toward the kitchen, and for a fleeting second I thought about sparing him, thought about swallowing my pride just to avoid seeing his face fall. But then Rebecca's voice echoed in my memory. This house is ours now. The push, the humiliation, the silence. I couldn't spare him anymore. Rebecca followed soon after, breezing in like she owned the place. She carried a shopping bag humming under her breath, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. Without so much as a glance in my direction, she dropped the bag on the couch and marched into the kitchen. "Oh, good, you're both here," I said calmly, though my pulse hammered in my ears. Daniel looked up, startled by the edge in my voice. Rebecca arched an eyebrow, her lips already curling into that condescending smile she wore like armor. "Yes, Agnes," she said, as though I were a maid about to be given instructions. I didn't flinch. Instead, I picked up the envelope, stood slowly, and walked toward her. Each step felt deliberate, steady, final. I stopped right in front of her and extended the envelope. "This," I said, my voice low but clear, "is for you." She frowned, plucked the envelope from my hand, and tore it open with exaggerated impatience. Her eyes darted across the page once, twice, and then froze. The smugness drained from her face like water leaking from a cracked vase. "What? What is this?" she stammered, her voice suddenly sharp. "An eviction notice," I said evenly, meeting her eyes. "You and Daniel have 30 days to leave this house." The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel's face went pale. He reached for the paper, snatching it from Rebecca's trembling hands, his eyes racing over the words as though he could erase them by reading fast enough. "Mom," his voice cracked, disbelief dripping from every syllable. "You can't be serious." I straightened my shoulders, drawing on every ounce of Robert's memory to keep me standing tall. I have never been more serious in my life. Rebecca recovered quickly, her shock morphing into fury. "You can't do this," she snapped, her voice rising. "This is our home. Daniel is your son. Don't you dare." "This is my home," I interrupted, my tone sharp enough to cut the air. "Your name isn't on the deed. Daniel's isn't either. Mine is. This house was built with my husband's hands and my sacrifices. And you," I pointed directly at her, my finger steady, "you will not push me out of it." Her face twisted with rage, but beneath it I saw something else. Fear. She knew. She had underestimated me. Daniel finally found his voice, slamming the paper down on the table. "Mom, this isn't fair. We've been living here. Fair?" I echoed, my voice trembling but strong. "Fair is me letting you live here rent-free all this time. Fair is me turning a blind eye while she disrespected me in my own kitchen, my own living room. Fair is me sitting silently while my son stood by and let his wife push his mother from her chair. You tell me, Daniel, what part of that is fair to me?" His lips parted, but no words came out. He looked at Rebecca, then at me, and for the first time I saw shame flicker in his eyes. Rebecca wasn't done. "This is ridiculous. We won't go. You can't just throw us out like garbage." I leaned forward slightly, my voice lowering to a calm steel. "I can, and I will, because I would rather live alone in this house with peace than be treated like a stranger in the home I built." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Rebecca's chest heaved with fury, her hands balled into fists. Daniel stared at the floor, silent again, caught between his wife's rage and his mother's resolve. I picked up the notice, smoothed it, and set it back on the table. "You have 30 days. I suggest you use them wisely." Without another word, I turned and walked out of the kitchen. My heart pounded. My legs felt weak, but my back remained straight. For the first time in months, I had claimed my place. Behind me, I heard Rebecca's voice break into a shrill cry, Daniel trying to calm her, both of them arguing in frantic whispers. But I didn't care. I went to my room, closed the door, and whispered into the silence, "Robert, I did it." I finally stood up. The days after the confrontation were thick with silence, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that presses against your chest until breathing feels like work. Rebecca stomped through the house like a storm cloud, slamming cabinet doors, muttering under her breath, making sure every step reminded me she wasn't leaving without a fight. Daniel, meanwhile, avoided me altogether. He left for work earlier than usual and came home late. When we did cross paths, he gave me the sort of look a child gives a teacher after being scolded, hurt, confused, but mostly resentful. I tried not to let it break me, but the truth is his silence was worse than Rebecca's venom. One night, just a few days after I handed Rebecca the eviction notice, Daniel finally spoke. I was in the kitchen washing dishes when I heard his footsteps behind me. His voice was low, but the tension in it cut straight through me. "Mom," he said, "we need to talk." I dried my hands slowly, bracing myself. I turned to see him standing there, arms crossed, his jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle twitch. "What is it, Daniel?" I asked, keeping my tone steady. He took a deep breath, as if he was about to deliver bad news at work. "This eviction, you can't be serious. Rebecca and I, this is our home now. You can't just decide to throw us out." I stared at him, disbelief flooding me. "Our home? Daniel, this house is mine. It's always been mine. Your father and I built it. We paid for it. We protected it. The only reason you live here is because I let you." His face twisted as though I had slapped him. "Do you hear yourself? You make it sound like we're freeloaders. We're family." I set the dish towel down, my hands trembling now, not with fear, but with anger. Family doesn't stand by silently while their mother is pushed aside in her own dining room. Family doesn't let their wife sneer and claim what doesn't belong to her. He flinched, but didn't back down. "Rebecca didn't mean it that way. She was upset. She pushed me, Daniel," I interrupted, my voice rising. "She put her hands on me and told me this house was hers. And you sat there. You said nothing. That silence was worse than the push." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Guilt, maybe, but it vanished quickly, replaced by stubbornness. "You're overreacting," he said flatly. "Rebecca and I have plans. We've been talking about children, about making this house fit for the future. You can't expect us to raise a family here if you're always in the way." The words landed like stones. In the way. My own son. The boy I carried. The boy Robert and I raised with love and sacrifice. Standing in my kitchen and telling me I was an obstacle to his happiness. I steadied myself on the counter. My knees wanted to buckle, but I refused to let him see me fall. "Daniel," I said, my voice quieter now but sharper, "this isn't about children. This isn't about the future. This is about respect, and the fact that your loyalty lies with a woman who disrespects me rather than with your own mother." He looked away, his jaw tightening. For a moment I thought I saw tears in his eyes, but he blinked them back. "I love you, Mom," he said, his voice strained. "But I love Rebecca too, and she's my wife. I have to stand with her." My heart cracked at those words. Not because he loved his wife. That was right. That was natural. But because in standing with her, he had chosen to stand against me. I turned back to the sink, my hands gripping the edge so hard my knuckles whitened. "Then you'll stand with her," I said softly, "as you pack your things and walk out of this house." Behind me, he let out a harsh breath, somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "You'll regret this," he muttered. "You'll end up alone." I turned back to face him, and though my voice shook, it carried the weight of truth. Better alone with dignity than surrounded by people who treat me like I'm invisible. For a long moment, he just stood there, breathing heavily, his face red with frustration. Then he turned and left, the sound of his footsteps echoing through the house like thunder. When the door slammed behind him, I felt the air shudder in my lungs. I pressed a hand to my chest, steadying myself. My son had chosen her. My son had betrayed me. But even through the pain, one thing was clear. I would not bend, not for him, not for her. This house was mine, and no betrayal, not even Daniel's, would change that. The 30 days passed slower than molasses in winter. Each sunrise brought fresh tension. Each sunset ended with slammed doors and muttered insults. Rebecca strutted through the house with the arrogance of a queen whose crown was slipping. And Daniel, my Daniel, kept to himself, silent, simmering, his loyalty to her poisoning whatever bond we had left. I kept my composure. I cooked my meals, watered the garden, polished Robert's photograph on the mantel. But beneath it all, I was counting down. Every tick of the clock brought us closer to the day when patience would give way to action. When that morning finally arrived, the air was sharp and cool, almost celebratory. I woke before dawn, my chest tight but steady. I brewed myself a cup of tea, dressed in my navy cardigan, and pinned my pearl brooch. Armor, once again. At precisely 9 o'clock, a moving truck rumbled down the street and stopped in front of the house. Its engine hummed like a herald of justice. Out stepped 2 men in blue uniforms, strong and efficient, clipboards in hand. Rebecca's shriek echoed through the hallway as soon as she saw the truck. "Daniel!" she screamed. "Daniel, do something! She's serious! She's actually doing it!" I stood in the doorway of the dining room, calm as still water. "I told you this day would come," I said softly. "You chose not to believe me." She spun on me, her eyes wild, her face blotchy with rage. "You witch!" she spat. "You're tearing this family apart. You're evil, Agnes, evil." Her words were knives, but I had been cut so many times already that I no longer bled. I simply looked at her with a steady gaze. "I am not evil, Rebecca. I am tired. Tired of being disrespected in my own home. Today that ends." The movers entered politely, professional, and detached. "Ma'am," one of them said, "we're here to pack their belongings. Could you point us to the rooms?" Rebecca turned to Daniel, desperation dripping from her voice. "Say something. Stop this. It's your mother." Daniel stood near the staircase, pale, his hands clenched into fists. For a moment, I thought he might defy me, might tell the movers to leave. But then his shoulders slumped. His voice came out low and hollow. Just get it over with." The movers didn't hesitate. They headed upstairs, boxes in hand, while Rebecca shrieked after them, trying to block their way. But they were professionals. Calmly, firmly, they maneuvered around her, their movements practiced, unstoppable. I watched as the life Rebecca had tried to build on my back was dismantled piece by piece. Her dresses pulled from the closet, her jewelry box packed carefully, her shoes, so many shoes, lined in boxes. Daniel's suits, his books, their trinkets, all stripped from the rooms they had claimed as theirs. Rebecca wept, screamed, cursed. At one point, she dropped to her knees in the hallway, clutching a box, sobbing, "This isn't fair. You can't do this to us." I approached her slowly, my steps measured, my voice calm. "Fair," I said, kneeling slightly so my eyes met hers, "is me giving you 30 days instead of 3. Fair is me allowing you to live here rent-free all this time. Fair is me holding my tongue while you pushed me out of my own seat. Don't you dare tell me about fair, Rebecca." Her sobs turned to snarls. She lunged up, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You'll die alone in this house, Agnes. Alone. And when you do, no one will care." For a moment her words burned. They pierced deep, because they struck at the very fear that had haunted me since Robert passed, that one day this house would echo with nothing but emptiness. But then I looked past her to the movers carrying another box out the door, and I realized something. Alone was better than disrespected. Alone was better than erased. Alone, I still had dignity. By late afternoon, the house looked lighter. The truck filled quickly, swallowing every piece of them, until only the echo of their voices remained. Rebecca stood on the front lawn, arms crossed, red-faced, muttering curses under her breath. Daniel lingered by the truck, staring at the ground, unable to look me in the eye. When the last box was carried out, one of the movers handed Rebecca the clipboard. She scribbled furiously, her hand shaking, and shoved it back at him. The truck door slammed shut, and with a heavy groan, it pulled away from the curb. Silence fell. Real silence. Not the heavy silence of resentment, but the clean, empty silence of space reclaimed. I stood in the doorway, watching the truck disappear down the street. My hands trembled, not from weakness, but from release. For the first time in months, maybe years, I could breathe. Rebecca had fallen silent. Daniel had walked away. And my house, my home, was mine again. The quiet that settled over the house after the movers left was almost too much to bear. Every room seemed to breathe again, free of tension, but the silence pressed on me like a weight. For the first time in months, I could walk through the hallways without hearing slamming doors, without stepping over Rebecca's shoes, without feeling like an intruder. I should have felt relief, and in some ways, I did. But as I wandered from room to room, touching the bare spaces where their belongings had once cluttered the floor, another feeling rose in me: loneliness. That loneliness didn't stay inside the walls for long. It followed me outside, into the neighborhood. The very next morning, I stepped out to water the roses Robert had planted years ago. Mrs. Cooper, my next-door neighbor, was already out on her porch, sipping coffee with her husband. She raised her eyebrows, leaned closer to him, and whispered something that made his head turn in my direction. Soon enough, the whispers spread. At the market, I felt the weight of eyes on me as I pushed my cart down the aisle. Two women by the dairy section hushed their conversation as I walked by, their smiles thin and forced. Another woman I'd known for years approached me with a tilted head. "Agnes," she said softly, "I heard Daniel and Rebecca moved out. Everything all right at home?" Her tone dripped with curiosity, not concern. I forced a small smile. "Everything is just fine." But the truth was written on their faces. They had already heard pieces of the story, and Rebecca was clearly painting herself as the victim. By the weekend, the gossip reached a peak. I heard it directly from my old friend Marjorie, who showed up on my porch with a basket of muffins. "I don't mean to pry," she began, setting the basket down, "but Rebecca's been telling folks you threw her and Daniel out with no warning. Says you wanted the house to yourself." I let out a long breath, gripping the porch railing. Of course she did. Marjorie gave me that look only old friends can give, half sympathy, half admiration. "I told them it didn't sound like you, Agnes. I told them there had to be more to the story." "There is," I said firmly, "but I don't owe anyone the details. This is my home. I protected it. That's all anyone needs to know." She nodded, handing me a muffin. "You did the right thing. People will talk, but they'll forget eventually. Don't you let their gossip undo your peace." Her words steadied me, but the whispers didn't stop. At church, I noticed the side glances. The polite smiles stretched too thin. A few even avoided me altogether. For some, I was no longer the quiet widow tending her garden. I was the woman who threw her own son out. And yet, not everyone judged. Some surprised me with their support. One afternoon, Mr. Alvarez from across the street knocked on my door. He was a quiet man, a widower himself, not prone to gossip. "I just wanted to say," he told me, "that what you did took courage. Most people would have let themselves be walked over. You didn't. Robert would have been proud." His words nearly brought me to tears. I realized then that the community's reaction didn't matter as much as I thought. Some would believe Rebecca's story, some would judge me, and some would admire me. But at the end of the day, none of them had been in that dining room. None of them had felt that push, heard those words. As I stood on my porch that evening, the sun dipping low behind the houses, I whispered to myself, "Let them talk. I know the truth, and the truth is enough." Still, the sting lingered. I wondered how many people now saw me not as Agnes Whitford, the widow who baked cookies for every neighborhood potluck, but as Agnes, the woman who evicted her own son. The irony wasn't lost on me. Rebecca had tried to erase me inside my own home. Now she was trying to erase me in the eyes of others. But the difference was clear. Inside my house, I had the deed. Out here, I had my dignity, and no amount of gossip could take that from me. I should have known Rebecca wouldn't accept defeat easily. People like her rarely do. The eviction had removed her from my home, but not from my life. Not yet. The first sign came a week after the moving truck pulled away. I was at the bakery picking up a loaf of sourdough when I overheard two women near the counter whispering, "Did you hear?" "Poor Rebecca," one said. "Thrown out with nowhere to go. Her husband's own mother, can you imagine?" Their eyes flicked to me, then quickly away. It didn't take long to piece it together. Rebecca was telling everyone that I had kicked them out heartlessly, painting herself as the devoted daughter-in-law, mistreated by a bitter old woman. She left out the push, the words, the disrespect. She left out Daniel's silence. To hear her version, you would think I woke up one morning and tossed them into the street out of spite. At first, I ignored it. Let people talk, I told myself. The truth has a way of surfacing. But ignoring Rebecca was like ignoring a wasp. It only gave her more room to sting. Soon, distant relatives began calling. My cousin Elaine phoned one evening, her voice tight with judgment. "Agnes, I just can't understand it. Why would you throw Daniel out? He's your only son." I bit back the sting in my throat. "Elaine, I did what I had to. You weren't here. You didn't see what was happening in this house." But she didn't want to listen. Few of them did. Rebecca had gotten to them first. The cruelest blow came when my niece, sweet little Sarah, whom I had helped raise when her mother was ill, sent me a message on Facebook. "Aunt Agnes, I don't know what's happening, but everyone says you've turned cold, that you're not the woman I thought you were." I sat staring at the screen for a long time, my hands trembling. Rebecca hadn't just twisted the story. She was trying to erase my reputation, my character, everything I had built over 74 years. But what Rebecca hadn't counted on was that I was not alone. Marjorie, my old friend, stood by me. She called after hearing the latest rumor. "Don't you let her win, Agnes," she said firmly. People like Rebecca thrive on drama. They twist words until the whole world looks upside down. But those who truly know you know better. Her support steadied me, but I knew I had to act. The breaking point came at church. As I walked down the aisle to my usual pew, I felt the weight of eyes again, whispering, pity, judgment, and then, as if on cue, Rebecca herself appeared at the entrance. She was dressed impeccably, her hair styled, her face painted with sorrow. She walked straight to a small group of women and launched into her story, loud enough for everyone to hear. "She threw us out with nothing," Rebecca lamented, her voice quivering. "Daniel begged her to reconsider, but she wouldn't. We didn't deserve this. We only ever wanted to help her, to make the house better. But she wanted us gone." I froze, anger burning through me. People turned their heads toward me, their expressions unreadable. Rebecca's eyes flicked to mine, smug, triumphant. That was the moment I realized Rebecca's revenge wasn't just about losing the house. It was about humiliating me. She couldn't push me physically anymore, so she would try to push me socially, isolating me, turning me into the villain in every whispered story. But she had underestimated me again. That very evening, I walked to the community center, where I knew a handful of neighbors gathered for their weekly meeting. I waited until it was my turn to speak. My voice trembled at first, but I steadied it with Robert's memory, with the truth that had carried me this far. "I know there have been rumors," I said, looking around the room, "and I know many of you have heard Rebecca's version of what happened. But here is the truth. I did not throw my son and his wife out of cruelty. I asked them to leave because they disrespected me, disrespected the home Robert and I built, and treated me like a stranger in the house that has my name on its deed. I will not apologize for demanding respect in my own home." The room was silent. Some shifted uncomfortably, others nodded slowly. I didn't wait for their approval. I didn't need it. That night, as I walked home under the streetlights, I felt something lift inside me. Rebecca could scream, could gossip, could try to stain my name, but she couldn't change the truth, and the truth was mine to carry. I had survived her push. I had survived Daniel's silence, and I would survive her lies too. It had been nearly 2 months since the movers took Rebecca's things away. The house was quiet now, sometimes achingly so, but I had learned to live with the silence. I filled it with my own rhythm, the hum of the kettle, the soft creak of the rocking chair, the rustle of the newspaper. I thought I had seen the last of them, until one evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, there was a knock at my door. It wasn't frantic, like Rebecca's had always been, but slow, hesitant. When I opened it, Daniel stood there, alone. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair unkempt, his clothes wrinkled. He looked smaller somehow, like the weight of the world had finally bent his shoulders. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he let out a long breath and said softly, "Mom, can I come in?" I stepped aside without a word. He walked past me, glancing around the house as though it had changed in his absence. But nothing had changed, except him. He sat at the dining table, the same oak table where it had all begun. He traced the edge with his finger, his face tight, and for the first time in months, I saw not the man who had betrayed me, but the boy I once knew, the boy who used to sit at that same table with scraped knees and wide eyes, asking for second helpings of stew. "Where's Rebecca?" I asked finally, my voice even. He swallowed hard. "She's gone." The word hung heavy between us. "Gone?" I repeated. "She left," he said, his voice breaking. "After the eviction, things got worse. She couldn't handle living in the little apartment we found. She blamed me for losing the house, said I wasn't ambitious enough, that I should have fought harder. Last week, she packed her bags and left. No note, nothing." I studied him, my chest tightening. I wanted to feel vindicated, wanted to tell him I had warned him, but all I saw was my son, broken, lost, abandoned. He looked up at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I don't have anywhere else to go, Mom. I was wrong. About everything. About her. About how I treated you. I should have stood up for you. I should have protected you instead of letting her." His voice cracked, and he dropped his head into his hands. For a long moment I stayed silent. The bitterness of his betrayal still lingered in me, sharp and raw. But so did the memory of rocking him to sleep as a baby, of cheering at his school plays, of holding his hand at Robert's funeral, when we both thought the grief would crush us. I pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. "Daniel," I said softly, "this will always be your home, but it is not Rebecca's, not anymore, and it will not be yours unless you understand one thing." He lifted his head slowly, his face streaked with tears. "Respect," I said firmly. "Respect is the rent you will pay if you stay under this roof. Not money, not favors. Respect. For me, for this house, for the life your father and I built here." He nodded quickly, almost desperately. "I understand. I promise, Mom, I'll do better. I just want to come home." A long silence stretched between us. Finally, I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. His fingers tightened around mine like a lifeline. "You are my son," I whispered. "That will never change. But you broke something between us, Daniel. It will take time to mend." "I know," he said, his voice thick, "and I'll do whatever it takes." For the first time in months, I felt something stir in my chest. Hope. Not a naive hope that everything would go back to the way it was, but a steady hope that perhaps, piece by piece, we could build something new. Rebecca was gone. The lies, the arrogance, the poison she brought into my home, they were gone with her. What remained was my son, humbled, wounded, but mine still. That night, as I set out a blanket for him on the couch, I whispered to Robert's photograph on the mantel, "He's come back, love. Not whole, not perfect, but he's come back." And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel quite so alone. The weeks that followed Daniel's return were not simple, but they were quieter. He kept his word. He moved through the house gently, almost reverently, as if afraid to disturb the peace he had once allowed Rebecca to shatter. He fixed small things, the creaky hinge on the back door, the loose railing on the porch, not because I asked, but because he wanted to show me he still belonged here. I didn't shower him with forgiveness. That kind of wound doesn't heal with quick words or hurried gestures. But I let him stay. We ate dinners together, sometimes in silence, sometimes in halting conversation. I saw glimpses of the boy he had once been, and I held on to those moments like threads of hope. Still, at night, when the house fell quiet, I often found myself back at the oak table, the same table where everything had unraveled, the same table where I had once been pushed aside. Only now, when I sat there, it was in peace. I'd place a candle in the center, just like Robert used to, and let the soft glow fill the room. Some nights Daniel sat across from me, his head bowed, his voice low, as he apologized again. Other nights I sat alone, sipping tea, listening to the silence that no longer felt heavy but holy. One evening I leaned back in my chair and whispered to the empty room, "We did it, Robert. I defended our home. I defended us." The words brought tears to my eyes, but this time they weren't from grief. They were from strength. The neighbors eventually quieted their gossip. Rebecca's stories faded once she disappeared from town, leaving Daniel behind. Some still looked at me with pity, others with admiration. But I no longer cared. I had learned that peace doesn't come from others' approval. It comes from standing tall, even when those closest to you try to push you down. And so, I began reclaiming not just the house, but myself. I filled the garden with new roses. I polished the wooden banister until it gleamed. I rearranged the furniture, not to erase the past, but to remind myself that this house was still alive, still mine. Daniel often asked if I regretted handing Rebecca that eviction notice. I'd shake my head slowly and say, "No, son, because sometimes love means drawing a line, and sometimes strength means standing alone if you have to." Now, as I sit here sharing my story with you, I want you to remember this. No one, not a stranger, not a friend, not even family, has the right to strip you of dignity in your own home. We older folks, we've lived too much life, carried too many burdens to let anyone push us aside like we're nothing. Respect is not optional. So I ask you, wherever you're watching from, have you ever had to stand your ground even against family? Because if you have, then you know it hurts, it costs, but it saves something far greater. It saves you. And as for me, well, I may sit alone at this oak table some nights, the candle flickering in the stillness, but I am not lonely. I am surrounded by memory, by dignity, by the unshakable truth that I did not bend. Rebecca's voice is gone. Daniel's is softer now, humbled, and mine is steady again. This house is mine. My life is mine, and no one will ever push me away again.